Hello everyone, and in this tutorial I'm going to be talking about MIDI keyboard recording. And I do want to mention I have another tutorial on MIDI keyboard recording out there. You might want to watch that tutorial if you haven't seen it already, because in that tutorial I might cover some things that I'm not going to cover in this tutorial. But in this tutorial I'm going to try to recap what I talked about in the last tutorial. And primarily what I want to do though is focus on some of those things that I overlooked, and I want to focus on some of the things that people are having problems with. Now, most of you were able to set up your equipment fine with the MIDI keyboard recording tutorial that I already done, but there were some issues that I overlooked that were causing some people problems, and there were some common problems going on out there. Now, the first big issue that I want to talk about that a lot of people have difficulty with is they want to record their hardware synthesizer, their external synthesizer sounds in FL Studio. Through MIDI recording, you're not going to be able to directly do that. Do understand that MIDI, okay, so I have a nylon guitar. This is a software synthesizer. This is not my external synthesizer playing in here. If you want to get your external synthesizer to play in FL Studio, you have to record it. You have to record it with audio, with a line in. And you would do that in the mixer. You would set up a mixer track here. You would choose an input, and I'm not going to select one because it's going to cause an infinite feedback loop for me because I'm recording my voice here. But you would set your input to line in, most likely. Notice that the line in and mic are shared on my sound card, and that's why I can't demonstrate this. But if you plug your keyboard into the line in, select that in the mixer track, then you can record your external synthesizer, but you're not going to be recording MIDI. You're going to be recording audio. All right, why do I have to record audio? And the reason is because you have a MIDI keyboard, yes. That MIDI keyboard is there so you can control software synthesizers, you can control your digital audio workstation. Those external sounds you have, those programmed sounds, those are more for live performance. If you're someone that has a synthesizer that you use for live performance, that's primarily what that is for. And it's a musical instrument like a guitar, like a grand piano, like a flute. All right, if you wanted to get those things into FL Studio, you'd have to record the audio for those things. So understand the distinction here. Now, if you wanted to record MIDI and audio at the same time, you can set up a MIDI out channel out to your synthesizer. And let me get that MIDI out channel. You'd set up your MIDI out channel out to your synthesizer. Then you could record MIDI to the MIDI out. So I have my MIDI out going to the software synthesizer, but I could have very well just as easily had this MIDI out going out to my external synthesizer. So I know this is a little confusing, but what you would do is you would set up your MIDI out channel. You have an option to set up a port here. In your MIDI settings, you would hit F10. In your output, you would select your device. It should show up here if you have it hooked up properly. You would set the port number to the same port number that you selected here in your MIDI out. You can make this any number you want. This is just an identifier. So if I had this on 100, I would make my external synthesizer port number 100. Then I could record MIDI out to my external synthesizer. After you record the MIDI out to your synthesizer, you have to, later on, if you want to record that, you have to bring it in, as I showed you before, in the mixer here, and select the line in and then record it. Or you can record it with another application. And that's what I do. I actually use another application to do audio recording. I like using Adobe Audition, but in any case, you have to record that audio. It won't go in automatically through MIDI. And I know that was a long explanation, but it's not something that's exactly easy to explain to people that don't understand what's going on. So that was one big issue. So MIDI keyboard recording and audio recording, two totally different subjects. Now let's go back to the MIDI settings. Hitting F10 here. One issue people were having was that their input was too soft. And that happens. And that has to do with the dynamics of your keyboard. Every keyboard's a little different when it comes to dynamics. So here we have a velocity curve that we can adjust. If you're playing your keyboard and it's just too soft, it sounds like this, all right, and you're playing pretty hard, you might want to just adjust your velocity curve. And from time to time, you might have to jump back in here to adjust your velocity curve when you're using your MIDI keyboard with various external synthesizers too, that vary in velocity. So I have my velocity curve set up like that. all you have to do is click on this curve button and you can set up your velocity curve. And if you want more control, you can add points too. So let me delete that point. To add a point, just right click and it adds point. To delete, right click and you can delete. And there's some extra curve editing options that I'm not going to get into. You could try them out. But just know about the velocity curve here. And typically, you don't want to set to mod X or mod Y. You'd want to leave it on velocity. Or if you can't, if your keyboard doesn't have any velocity, you might want to select none here. But dynamics are important. I'm going to illustrate that a little later. And right here, support for hold. If you have a foot pedal, you want to make sure you don't uncheck that. And you might as well leave it checked all the time anyway. There's not too many instances where you'd really want this off. Now this option here, this was screwing up a lot of people. This is off by default. You don't want to turn this on if you don't know what it's about. But for some reason, people were turning this on and then they were saying, well, I can't record to the piano roll. And the reason is because if you have this option set, it's not going to record to the piano roll. It's going to record directly to the step sequencer onto these little blocks here, which are not, they're monophonic, okay? You can't get chords in here or anything. It's going to really screw you up. So unless you specifically want to record to the step sequencer, don't check that option here. Another thing that was screwing up a lot of people, for some reason people were setting up the muting channel. If you don't know what this is, just leave it off. If you set this to a specific channel, it's going to mute the channel you want to record to. Right? Especially if you set it to, MIDI channel 1, which is where all the information is coming from when you record into FL Studio. So you want to be careful of that as well. Make sure you don't have that turned on unless you know what it's all about and why you need to use it. And then from here, your input device, make sure you have it checked and turned on. All right, this is my USB MIDI cable. Make sure you have it enabled. If you don't have your device enabled, again, it's not going to work. Another issue, okay, now I talked about this in your audio settings. Okay, we have MIDI audio right here. Audio settings, your buffer length has to be low. I mentioned this in the last tutorial, and even though I mentioned it, people were still having difficulty understanding this. But if I go to my ASIO panel and I set my buffer setting to 100, all right, when I press my key, I'm going to get a delay, and it makes it difficult to play live. You have to have your buffer settings fairly low when you're MIDI keyboard recording, at least 10 milliseconds. I like to go lower, but since I'm screen recording, I can't really go lower than 10 milliseconds. So for live recording, a low buffer setting is really important. And then an ASIO driver, that's important too. If you can't get your ASIO driver working, then you're going to have to find technical support or something to get your ASIO driver working. It's just a really important feature within FL Studio that enables you to do real-time recording and anything real-time within FL Studio. Really, ASIO is important. And if you can't get ASIO to work, it might be because of your sound card. You might be using the integrated sound card for your device. You might need a better sound card. But whatever it may be, you have to figure out what that problem is. And there were a lot of people that were having issues getting an ASIO driver to work. And unfortunately, I can't help you with something like that unless I'm actually sitting in front of your system, seeing exactly what kind of hardware you have. I'd have to go in and take a look at your sound settings in the control panel. I'd have to actually physically be there to help you. So when I don't respond back to you when you ask me for help with issues like that, just understand that on my end, I can't do it. I'd have to actually be sitting in front of your system. And unfortunately, this is something you have to figure out on your own. And if you can't, you have to call in an audio technician to come get your equipment straightened out. And you can always try the online forums at the FL Studio website too. The technical staff there is really good. However, they have the same problem I have. I mean, it's very difficult for them to help you remotely. They'd actually have to be there with you. They might give you some phone support though. If you're a registered user, especially if you're a new user, they'll really help you out to get you going. So, let's talk about actually getting things recorded. So, the first thing you want to check right up here is in your options panel. You want to enable MIDI output if you're going to be recording to an external hardware synthesizer. Notice I don't have enable MIDI output checked. However, if I want to play input live, I won't have a problem. This is only if you want to send MIDI out somewhere, right? Either to your external device or to an internal synthesizer. And I'm going to turn this on for a moment. because I do want to illustrate something. Some people were not really understanding the whole purpose of MIDI recording. They didn't really get it, why they would need to do it. And you don't have to do this. You don't have to record live to create good music in FL Studio. It just takes a lot more work if you're not. And to illustrate that, what I have here is I have set up a MIDI out channel, and it's going out to my software synthesizer. Now, this was digitally sequenced by someone who went in, they didn't record live. They actually went in here and they plugged in notes one by one. They sequence this by hand without live recording. And I want you to listen to this and just hear the quality of it. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. I'm going to draw this into my playlist here, and I'm going to press play. Alright, and you can hear that, and it sounds pretty bad. That does not sound good. It sounds like a machine, and it doesn't have any human touch, any human quality to it. Now, if I go and play that exact same thing live, it's going to sound a lot different. So that's the difference. And you can hear the dynamics. I'm using my foot pedal to sustain notes. There's a lot going on that adds a human touch. The dynamics are extremely important. So just so you're aware of how live recording makes a big difference. And that's the reason why you'd want to do any kind of MIDI recording, is just to get that human touch. Now, one thing I have set up here is I have a drum loop set up just because I have to keep in time. I have my tempo set to 90. And I need something that's going to keep me aware of the time, just so I can mix things in later. Now you can use a metronome. If I press play here, we have a metronome. If you can play to a metronome. Alright, I have a difficult time keeping up with a metronome. Keeping time to a metronome anyway. So I use a MIDI drum loop. I just find it a lot easier to play to a drum loop. So I'm going to be recording to the drum loop here. I'm in song mode. You can record in pattern mode if you want to. I have to be in song mode because I have a drum loop painted in here that's helping me keep time. And I think there are a lot of people out there that rather keep in time to a drum track than to a metronome. It's up to you. There's another option here. This is the wait option. Right, if I press play, everything's going to be paused until I press my MIDI input device. And this only gives you an opportunity to get set up before you start recording. And I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, we're ready to record, so let's just record this piece right here. And this is actually a Pink Floyd song, and I'm just going to record that to the drum loop here. And we'll talk about how you go in and check things out in the piano roll as well. So I'm going to arm my track for recording right here. Now I have the wait option turned on. So this is ready to record, but until I actually start playing, nothing's going to record. And it's up to you whether you want to use the wait option or the countdown option as well. This counts a couple bars before you start playing 1 or 2 bars. You can right click to configure 1 or 2 bars here for that. Alright, so we're ready to go. So what I'm going to do now is just turn off my microphone, and then I'm going to live record the guitar track here. And right now what we're going to do is we're going to go into the piano roll and take a look at it. And we're going to fix any issues that need to be fixed. The first thing we want to do, if you recognize any mistakes that you made during the recording, you want to go and check that out. And for me, I think right here is where I can use some work. All right, I'm going to turn off record now. I'm also going to uncheck the wait option. All right, and I can switch to pattern mode to listen to this without the drum track. That just does not sound quite right. But we're going to go, well, actually what I'm going to do first is I'm going to do Control A, and then I'm going to do Quick Quantize, Tools, Quick Quantize here. We're going to listen to that again. Oops, and I got to edit, undo that. All right, now with Quantize, you want to stretch out to the highest resolution first, and because if you quick quantize with smaller blocks, it's going to quantize to the resolution that you have in your grid here. So what I'm going to do is expand this all the way out to get the highest resolution, and then I'm going to do Tools, Quick Quantize. And then I can go in here and fix some issues that are going on. I can adjust the note here. Let me just, all right, we're okay. Check that out. Going through here, just quickly scanning things to make sure all the notes look like they're in the right spot. Stuff like this you want to take care of. That's where I held the foot pedal down in some areas. Might have held down too long. All right, now this is definitely where I had some problems going on. All right, right here, another foot pedal issue. Take care of that. Right now this sounds fine after it was quantized. And this, I'm just going to drag this out. We're going to hold that note at about 19 bars there. And all in all, I think that wasn't that bad of a recording. I think it was pretty good, especially after it was quantized. And then you want to go in here and check note lengths. I mean, well, your velocities. Right? If you want to emphasize some notes, you can do that. One thing I also do, if there's something I'm recording that seems to be too difficult for me to play, I might play like a toned down version of it and then go in and chop up notes if I have to, or add extra notes to elaborate on a recording that might be too difficult for me to play the way I want to play it. But I mean, that all in all, that looks good. So let's listen to that. And then after this, I'm going to just end this tutorial. And I know that was a long tutorial. Sorry if it got a little technical some parts. It's just unavoidable with a topic like this. And hopefully that helps many of you out there. Hopefully I got around to covering some of those issues that were giving some of you problems out there. And with that, I'm just going to end this tutorial.